A shaft sealed more than a century ago, a town built on what it chose to forget, and a warning stamped into rusted steel. But when two men crawled beneath the hills of Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania, they found something still working down there. He said whatever is down there is pure evil. He calls this story the Miner's Gate. Welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and become part of our ever-growing community of the curious. My name's Ethan Miller, and I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do with it. I don't want to go back there, but every night I dream about that elevator door closing. It happened near St. Clair, Pennsylvania, inside an abandoned mine that was supposed to be sealed since 1904. I've been doing urban exploration since college: tunnels, factories, storm drains, anything that's supposed to be off limits. I liked the quiet. I liked being somewhere most people didn't know existed. I never went looking for trouble. I just wanted to document forgotten places. Last April, I got a message from another explorer named Marcus Mick Holbrook. He sent me a map of a coal seam under the old Girard breaker, showing a narrow ventilation shaft labeled Gate 17. He said it was only accessible from a sinkhole behind an abandoned diner off Route 61. He claimed there were carvings on the walls from miners before the collapse, names, tally marks, maybe even personal effects left behind. He wanted to go photograph them. We met on April 12, 2025 in the parking lot of that diner, the Blue Lantern Cafe, boarded up and half collapsed. Mick was in his 40s, a quiet guy, smelled like cigarettes and oil. He'd been underground before, said he worked maintenance for Reading Anthracite years ago before they shut down most of their shafts. The sinkhole was 50 yards behind the building, hidden under dead leaves and a pile of old pallets. You could feel the air pulling downward. That's how you know a mine's still open somewhere deep below. It breathes. We rigged a rope and climbed in. The drop was only 20 feet, but the passage below ran straight into black. We switched on our lamps and started walking. The tunnel was narrow, with timber supports every few yards. The air was heavy and smelled like rust. Along the walls, thick cables ran like veins, leading deeper into the dark. We found a few old tools, a broken pickaxe, a tin lunch pail, a miner's helmet turning to dust. Mick said quietly, "This ain't on any map anymore." Gate 17 wasn't supposed to go this far back. The deeper we went, the older it looked. The rock changed color, from gray slate to something darker, oily. Then the ground dipped, and we stepped into an area where the walls were black with soot. That's when we saw the first door. It was made of iron, half rusted, bolted into stone, stamped across the front in faded letters. Penn Coal Company, elevator access, authorized crews only. Mick brushed the dust off and looked at me. "You want to see what's on the other side?" I shouldn't have said yes. He found a crowbar in his pack and pried the latch. The door groaned open, and a gust of air came out that smelled like burned plastic and rotten eggs. Inside was a vertical shaft, maybe 12 feet across, cables hanging down the middle. There was an elevator platform still on the rails. The control panel was old, brass levers and a dial marked levels 1 to 7. Someone had scratched words into the metal plate below it. It said, "Keep the fire working." We both stood there staring at that elevator. Mick wiped sweat from his forehead, even though it was cold down there. "You think it still runs?" I asked. "Only one way to find out." He reached for the lever, and the second his hand touched it, there was a snap, a burst of noise, and the old electric motor above us hummed to life. The cables twitched, dust poured from the rafters, the elevator platform jerked, then steadied. The dial needle moved from off to level 1. Mick laughed nervously. "Geez, there's still power down here." We stepped on. The metal floor shook under our boots. He pulled the lever for level 2. The gate closed automatically, scraping shut with a clang. Then we began to move down. No sound except the steady groan of machinery. It felt endless. 10 seconds, 20, maybe more. Then the gate opened again. What we saw didn't make sense. It wasn't rock or tunnel walls. It was a wide concrete corridor with electric bulbs spaced along the ceiling, all lit. There were wheelbarrows, crates stacked neatly, a cart full of coal that looked fresh. And far down the corridor, voices, low, rhythmic, like men chanting under their breath. Mick called out, "Hello? Anyone down here?" The voices stopped. Then, faintly, a metal door creaked open at the end of the hallway. 3 figures stepped out. They were wearing miners' uniforms, coveralls, helmets with carbide lamps, but everything about them was wrong. Their clothes looked clean but stiff, like wax. Their skin wasn't just darkened, it was coated, black as if painted, and shiny in the lamplight. Their eyes reflected white like glass beads. One of them held a pickaxe over his shoulder. Another carried a lunch pail. None of them blinked. When they spoke, their voices came out together, flat and hollow. "Shift change," they said. "It's time to descend." I said we didn't work there, that we were explorers. Mick started to back toward the elevator. The tallest one tilted his head slightly. He said, "The gate must not close empty." Then he raised his pickaxe. We ran. The elevator gate started to close on its own. Mick dove through first. I followed, scraping my shoulder on the frame. The last thing I saw before the door sealed was one of them standing perfectly still, smiling. The elevator began to rise. The dial flicked upward past level 1, but instead of stopping, it kept turning. Level 2, level 3, level 4. Then it stopped on a mark that wasn't labeled, just a red dash. And then the gate opened. The light coming from this level wasn't yellow like before. It was red, emergency lamps glowing in bursts along the walls. Everything was covered in ash. There were bodies there, dozens of them, men sitting upright against the walls, helmets in their laps, all of them blackened and brittle, like they'd burned but never fell over. The ground was soft under our boots. It took me a second to realize we were walking on layers of coal dust and ash. Mick was shaking. "We need to go up," he said. He tried the lever again, but nothing happened. Then, from behind us, came a scraping sound. One of the burned men turned his head. His mouth opened wide, but no sound came out. Just air, a deep, sucking gasp, like a bellows. His fingers twitched, clawing at the floor. Then they all began to move, dozens of them, slow and jerking, heads snapping up, eyes glowing dull red. The smell that hit us was so strong I gagged, sulfur and rotten meat. Mick grabbed my arm. "Run!" We stumbled through a narrow passage at the far end. It led into another chamber, smaller, but lined with pipes and rusted switches. There was a generator humming in the corner. It was hooked into the elevator cables. Power was coming from somewhere. The gauges showed pressure, heat, movement, all active. Something below us was still running the mine. We followed the cables deeper. I don't know why. Maybe we thought we'd find a way out. After 20 minutes, we reached a massive door made of solid steel. On it was painted a symbol, a circle with 7 lines radiating out, like spokes. The same symbol was scratched onto the elevator lever. There were also several giant rocks with evil-looking faces chiseled into them. There was a small hatch window. I looked inside. The room beyond glowed orange. A furnace burned at the center, coal feeding itself from a conveyor belt that moved without sound. Around it stood the same blackened miners, dozens of them, shoveling endlessly, their skin cracking from heat, but never breaking. And above the fire, suspended from a crane, was a shape. At first I thought it was a statue. Then it breathed. It looked human but melted, its skin fused with stone and metal. Its mouth stretched open wider than its face. A voice came from it, a dry hiss. It said, "Keep the fire working." Mick started banging on the wall with his crowbar. The figures turned toward us. One of them hit the release. The steel door swung open. The heat hit us so hard. The workers started moving toward us, silent except for the scrape of boots. Mick screamed and ran back toward the tunnels. I followed. I could hear the clang of their steps behind us, steady and fast. We reached the elevator and pulled the lever for up. Nothing happened. The lights flickered, then went out. Then, a hand clamped onto my shoulder. Hard, hot, burning. I swung with the crowbar and hit something solid. There was no sound, no grunt, just a dull thud. When I looked back, Mick was gone. Only his headlamp was left, spinning slowly on the ground. I climbed the cables by hand. I don't remember how long. My hands were bleeding, lungs full of soot. When I finally saw daylight, I pulled myself through a hole in the ceiling and rolled onto dirt. Sorry for the quick interruption. I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for being part of Weird Encounters. Lately, the channel hasn't been shown as much across this platform, so if you're enjoying this story, please take a second to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your support really helps new listeners discover these stories and keeps the channel going strong. Now, let's get back to this story. They found me 2 miles from the sinkhole, barefoot and half-conscious on a service road near St. Clair. I was covered in soot, fingernails split, skin burned in patches like burned by a stovetop. I don't remember walking that far. I don't remember anything between the elevator and sunlight. They took me to Schuylkill Medical Center. When I woke up, I was handcuffed to the bed. Detective Kearns from the local sheriff's department came in with 2 deputies. He had a calm voice, but I could tell he didn't believe a word I said. He asked about Mick, where he was, what happened underground, what the hell we were doing in a restricted mine. I told him everything: the elevator, the men, the furnace, the thing hanging above the fire. He just looked at me like I'd lost it. He said, "You've been gone for days. There's no power in any of those shafts. They've been sealed since before my grandfather was born." He said they'd sent a rescue team after finding our rope and gear near the diner. 3 workers from the local volunteer fire crew went down with sensors, but only 1 came back. The survivor's name was Adam Boone, age 37. When they found him, he was lying in the same brush I was, 3 days after I'd been found, with burns on his arms and a miner's helmet clutched to his chest. He wouldn't talk for the first week, but when he finally did, the only thing he said was, "They are still down there, and they never stopped working." This is something I will never forget. Kearns told me this later, quietly, after the official report came back. He said he was only telling me because he thought I might understand. He told me that Boone said they entered the shaft with ropes and an oxygen line. The air was strange, but breathable. About 50 feet in, their sensors started malfunctioning, temperature readings jumping from 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 180 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds. They found the elevator I'd described, though it was half buried. The cables were frayed and cold to the touch. The generator room I mentioned was there too, but dead. Nothing connected, no power. He said they heard noises, banging, like picks on stone. Then a man's voice saying, "Shift change." When they turned around, one of their crew was gone. His helmet lay in the dirt, light still on. Boone said the remaining 2 shouted down the tunnel, calling his name. Then, from the dark, they heard footsteps coming back. But when the figure appeared, it wasn't Robbie. He was wearing the same uniform, but his skin was black and blistered. His face had sunken in, eyes white, lips gone. He was holding his pick like a weapon. Boone said the man moved fast, too fast. He slammed one of them into the wall and broke his neck. The other ran for the elevator. Boone followed. The gate wouldn't close. He said he saw figures down the corridor, walking in single file, each holding a burning lantern that didn't use fire. They moved like machines, all turning their heads the same way, all whispering the same words over and over. They all said, "Keep the fire working." Then the ceiling above them cracked. Dust fell, then stone, then heat. Boone said he blacked out as flames shot through the tunnel. When he woke, he was lying near the surface, still clutching the helmet. Riley said the doctors found traces of soot inside his lungs, not from breathing smoke, but as if it had grown there, like the lining had turned to coal. I didn't want to go back. I told myself it was over. But 2 months later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo. It showed the same elevator gate, the one from the mine. Except in the photo, it was open. Standing inside were 5 figures, all in miners' uniforms, all blackened like before. In the center, barely visible, was someone that looked like Mick. His skin was strange-looking, and his eyes were wide open. Behind him, someone had written on the wall in chalk, but I couldn't make out what it said. I showed the photo to the police. They said it was a hoax, that no such level existed. But that night, my apartment filled with the smell of sulfur. Then the smoke detector went off. I checked the hallway, and there was nothing except a single black handprint on my front door. On August 4th, at 2:13 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID just said unknown. When I answered, I heard a steady grinding noise, like gears turning. Then a voice. It was Mick. He said, "They don't sleep, Ethan. They don't eat. They just work. You hear me? They can't stop." I asked where he was. He said, "Level 8. You'll see it soon." Then the line went dead. The next morning, I found a black smear on my window glass. It looked like someone had dragged a filthy hand down it. After that happened, I started sleeping in my truck, in different places every night. Every night, I heard faint clanking, chains or metal. Once, at a gas station near Frackville, a man in coveralls walked past me. I thought nothing of it until I saw the skin of his neck. It was cracked, blackened. When he turned his head, I saw he had no eyes, just empty sockets. I blinked, and he was gone. I don't know why I went back. Maybe to prove it was real. Maybe to stop dreaming about it. It was October 9th when I parked near the diner again. The place looked worse, overgrown, fence fallen. There was still a hole there. I climbed down with a new light, new camera, new batteries. The tunnel looked exactly the same, except for the footprints. Fresh boot marks in the coal dust, leading in. I followed them for maybe 200 feet before I saw something glowing ahead. A faint red light under the rock. It was pulsing. When I reached the chamber with the elevator, the gate was open. The lever was missing. On the floor lay a miner's helmet with a name scratched into the side. It said, Boone. The light inside flickered once, then went out. The cables above me began to move on their own. Dust rained down, and from below, faintly, I heard the voices again, dozens of them, chanting together. Shift change, shift change, shift change. The elevator rose without anyone on it, and it stopped at my level. The gate opened. Inside, it was empty except for a single object lying on the floor, a brass badge covered in soot. It said, Penn Coal Foreman, R. Kearns. I remember stepping back, shaking, my light trembling in my hand. Then I saw movement at the far end of the shaft, figures crawling out of the walls, dozens of them, some still wearing modern uniforms, one with a rescue patch, some missing pieces of themselves, all walking toward the elevator. I ran, dropped my camera, climbed the rope, and didn't stop until I saw the stars. By the time I reached my truck, the ground shook behind me. I looked back, and the dirt around the sinkhole was glowing red, and steam was rising. 2 months later, a small fire broke out in the woods behind the property. They said that when the firefighters arrived, they discovered the source, a narrow hole in the ground, blowing out heat like a furnace vent. Inside, barely visible through the smoke, was a rusted elevator gate. I haven't received any strange messages or seen anything strange since that day. I know there are lots of old mines around here and many that have caught on fire. Just look at what happened in Centralia, Pennsylvania, better known as Silent Hill. I am saddened by the losses that occurred because of this mine, and it's very difficult for me to talk about. I hope my story helps discourage anyone from exploring old mine shafts, and I hope this brings some sort of closure for Mick and the others that were lost. From Finleyville, Pennsylvania, comes a true account of a man whose car breaks down on a quiet country road. He describes this eerie event, which is downright terrifying. Let me know what you think happened in the comments below. I'm not really the type of person to write into a show like this, but after what happened to me about a year ago, I've gone over it in my head so many times that I figured maybe sharing it here might finally help me get some peace of mind. My name's Matt. I'm 34, and I live just outside Finleyville, Pennsylvania, near Route 88. My family's been in the area most of my life. It's all quiet back roads, open farmland, and stretches of woods that look the same year after year. This whole thing started on what I'd call a perfectly normal Saturday in late September. The kind of day where you just handle all the small errands you've been putting off. Run to the feed store, grab something from the hardware place, fill up on gas, maybe stop for a coffee at the Sheets near Library Road. Nothing special about it. I had taken my old Ford Ranger, the 2002 with the dent in the rear panel. It's not pretty, but it gets me around. That day it felt sluggish starting up in the morning, which didn't surprise me. I'd been putting off buying a new battery for weeks. I ran into South Park to pick up a part my buddy was holding for me, then cut back through Finleyville toward home. The weather was clear, maybe 68 degrees. Early evening sun just starting to drop behind the trees, casting those long shadows across the fields. I remember thinking how quiet it was on Boyd Road. Just the sound of tires on pavement and some crickets starting up. That's when my truck coughed once and lost power. No sputter, no warning, just died. I coasted it as far as I could and rolled to a stop right in front of this long gravel driveway. On either side, tall hedges and an old wooden fence with a rusted mailbox that had the number half rubbed off. At the end of the driveway, maybe 100 yards in, there was a farmhouse. 2-story, white siding, a barn behind it, and a line of trees framing the property. Looked old, but cared for. The kind of place you'd expect someone's grandparents to still live. What caught my attention was an older man out near the barn, bent over a tractor. Even from the road, I could see the sunlight flashing off the metal he was working on. I was already thinking how lucky that was, breaking down in front of a place with someone outside. So I popped the hood, gave it the obligatory glance like I knew what I was doing, then waved toward him. He stood up slowly and kind of squinted in my direction before setting his tools down and walking over. By the time he reached the fence, I could make out more details. Tall, thin, wearing faded overalls and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His hands were rough, like he'd been working them for decades. He had that weathered look some older farmers get. Lined face, eyes pale but sharp. I told him what happened, and he nodded without much surprise. Said something like, "Batteries go out faster than folks realize. You'd be surprised what cold mornings can do to them." His voice was calm, kind of gravelly. I remember thinking he sounded like someone's grandfather. He introduced himself as Charles Clayton. He asked where I was headed, and I told him I lived about 10 minutes down the road near Mingo Creek. He said he'd known that area well once, that his family used to hunt there back in the 40s. He offered to bring his tractor around to give me a jump. I told him I had cables, and he nodded and said, "Good. Haven't used those in a while, but she'll still charge a battery." He climbed onto that old green John Deere, the kind with the rounded front grille, and drove it up toward my truck. The thing rattled and chugged like a living animal. We hooked up the cables, and after a minute or so, my Ranger roared back to life. Relief doesn't even begin to describe what I felt. I thanked him about a dozen times, told him I wanted to give him $20 for his trouble. He just smiled and waved it off, saying, "Keep your money, son." Just glad I could help another local boy. But I was insistent. I told him I didn't have cash on me, but I'd drive home, grab some, and bring it right back. He looked at me for a long second, then nodded. "If you feel you need to," he said quietly. There was something about that moment, his tone maybe, that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Not in a bad way, just that odd awareness when something feels slightly off, but you can't say why. He gave me a friendly tap on the truck door and said, "You take care of that battery. They'll strand you when you least expect it." I thanked him again, waved, and pulled away. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw him turning the tractor back toward the barn, slow and steady. I got home maybe 15 minutes later. My dad was out in the garage working on his motorcycle. I told him what happened, how the truck died and how some kind old man helped me jump it. Dad asked where I'd broken down, and I said on Boyd Road, near what looked like an old farm. Told him the man's name, Charles Clayton. That's when I noticed Dad stop moving. He set his wrench down and looked at me. "Charles Clayton?" he repeated. I said, "Yeah, that's what he told me." Dad leaned against the workbench, his face tightening in a way I hadn't seen since we lost my mom. He asked me to describe the guy, what he looked like, what he was wearing, even what kind of tractor it was. When I finished, he just shook his head and said quietly, "Matt, there hasn't been a Clayton farm on Boyd Road in almost 20 years. I laughed a little because I thought he was joking. I told him I'd just been there. Big white farmhouse, barn, guy working a tractor. But he didn't laugh. He walked to a shelf, pulled down this old binder he keeps of local property records, something he's weirdly into, and flipped through it. He showed me a page from the Washington County deeds, pointing to an entry from 2003. The Clayton property, he said, had been sold off and demolished after the last of the family passed. The barn had burned down before that, sometime in the late 90s. The house was torn down soon after. I told him he must be mistaken because I'd literally seen it an hour ago. He said, "Matt, I knew Charles Clayton. He died when I was in high school. Tractor accident. Same field you're talking about." I laughed again, but it came out weak. The kind of laugh you make when your brain's trying to keep things normal. I said maybe I was at the wrong place, but the more I thought about it, the more certain I became of where I'd been. There aren't many turnoffs along that stretch, and that mailbox, I could still picture the half-faded numbers. Dad stared at me for a long time, then said, "You sure the truck even broke down there? Maybe it just stalled and you coasted farther than you thought." The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I told Dad I was driving back out there to drop off the $20 anyway. He told me not to waste my time, but I went. It was around 10 a.m., bright daylight, clear sky. I drove the same route, turned onto Boyd Road, and looked for the driveway. At first, I thought I'd missed it. The stretch looked different in daylight, but then I spotted that same rusted mailbox leaning a little to one side. Only this time, behind it, the driveway was overgrown with weeds and half blocked by a chain. I pulled off to the side and got out. The gravel that I remembered from yesterday was patchy, grass growing through it. The hedges were dead or gone entirely. When I walked in a few yards, all I saw was an empty field. Flat, wide, nothing but short brush and wildflowers. There was no house, no barn, not even the foundation of one. Just a few rotted fence posts and a broken water pump sticking out of the dirt. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of it. It felt like someone had hit me in the chest. I walked the length of where the driveway should have been, maybe 100 yards or so, but there was nothing. Just quiet. No tractor, no tools, no sign of anyone. When I got back to the road, I glanced down and saw something shiny in the grass near my tire. I bent down and picked it up. It was a small metal clamp, the kind used on jumper cables. It was new, not rusted, not dirty. Looked exactly like the kind I had on my cables. For some reason, that detail bothered me more than anything else. That night I told Dad what I found, and he didn't say much. He just listened and then poured himself a drink. He said he remembered when Charles Clayton died. It had been in the paper. Tractor flipped on him while he was working in the lower field. He said Charles was known as a good man. Quiet, generous, the kind who'd help anyone stuck on the side of the road. I went online later that evening and found a short archived obituary from the Observer reporter. It confirmed everything Dad said. Charles Clayton, born 1919, died 2003, survived by 3 children who moved out of state. I sat staring at the photo for a long time. It was black and white, probably taken decades ago, but the face, the shape of the jaw, the way his eyes seemed to squint against the sun, it was the same man who helped me. I know how that sounds. I've tried to think of every possible explanation. Maybe it was someone who looked like him, maybe some part of my brain filled in details that weren't there. But that doesn't explain the buildings. It doesn't explain how an entire farm could be there one day and gone the next. And the strangest part, since that day, my truck has never had a single issue starting again. Same old battery. Never replaced it. Sometimes when I drive past that stretch on Boyd Road, I catch myself slowing down. Every now and then, I think I see movement in the distance. Just a flicker of something metallic, like sunlight catching on a tractor grill. I don't stop. Whatever that was, it didn't feel threatening. If anything, it felt like kindness that refused to fade away. Like a man still watching over the land he loved, doing what he always did, helping people who break down in front of his farm. Still, there's a coldness that runs through me every time I remember the way he looked at me before I left, like he knew something I didn't. Maybe he did. Anyway, that's what happened. Believe it or not, I saw that man, spoke with him, shook his hand. I don't know if ghosts can help people, but if they can, I think that's what Charles Clayton was doing that day. And so, another strange encounter fades away. A trick of the mind, or something far more unsettling. That's for you to decide. Thank you so much for watching my stories. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support is what keeps this channel going.